Namaste. Welcome, beautiful souls. Welcome back to a personal journey through the Tarot de Marseille and similar decks. So I'm using that term quite loosely, including some more contemporary decks inspired by the Tarot de Marseille as well. And today I want to talk about le Pendu and its variations. And one of the things that I really want from this series and this year of having a really hard look at these cards is to expand. I read primarily decks with Golden Dawn correspondences and love the esoteric nature of tarot. I just really, really like that. And I think this has been an invaluable experience in diving into some of these older decks and looking at these cards in a new way. I have learned a lot, and I think this is a particularly difficult card to discuss because I don't want to talk about Pisces and Neptune and primordial water and all of that. I really want to look at the nature of this card and how I might learn to see this card in a new way, or begin to expand my repertoire of vocabulary in terms of the Hanged Man or the Hanged One, le pendu, la pendu, however it is spelled in Italian or Spanish or French or English. Okay, so let's do this. Now, I'm going to read just a little bit from Kathleen Matthews' book, The Untold Tarot, just so I get this right. The old wanted posters. The original image of the Hanged Man of the Tarot is based upon the Florentine custom of portraying traitors on placards on the wall of a municipal building as an awful warning to the would-be malefactor and as a point of information to aggrieved citizens. If the traitor had been caught, he was painted on the wall as being hanged by the neck. But if the traitor was still at large, he was shown being hanged from one heel in a kind of wanted poster. It is in this latter form that we are used to seeing the Hanged Man. Now, when I go through David's book and some of the other historical tarot references, this was indeed a form of public shaming that was quite common. And there's a couple of different depictions here. In some of these, we see a well-constructed platform from which to hang someone. And in others, we see two trees that have been selected, the branches removed, and then somebody is hung from on a connecting cross piece. So from what I understand is that these roughly construed, I'm sorry, I forget the word. There was a word for it. Hanging branches from which to hang someone were on the outskirts of town, and these offenders were hung on the outskirts of town where presumably there were wild animals, wolves and bears and other things, other creatures that potentially would harm these folks. So there's that piece of this, and this idea of whether you were a traitor or whether this was for heresy or some crime against the community or the church, you were publicly shamed for this. Now, if you go back also through some of the books, hi Perry, welcome, you'll see that a lot of the older paintings, the hangings were done without clothing on. And in the tarot, we have, for the most part, fully clothed bodies. And you'll see that in some of the older paintings, there was a great deal of torture that happened, and then they were left to hang from their feet. So how do we want to incorporate this into a contemporary reading? And yes, also the public hanging of Jews was one example. I believe that was in David's book as well too. People who live against the norm were publicly shamed. And we all know all kinds of different groups of people through history who were made public, were publicly tortured or publicly killed or publicly shamed. And so maybe what I want to take from this is a sense of what it feels like to be publicly humiliated, to feel like you are on the outskirts, like you are an outsider, you are on the outside, and that this card is a reflection of how you are made to feel and how you perceive yourself. And that's real. I mean, that really hits home today. Looking at, I just saw a poster today about LGBTQ plus community. And at the beginning of that, I think there was 2S LGBTQ plus. There are a lot of members of society who feel this way and who are publicly shamed. I just saw on a Facebook reel a white family who had adopted a child from China. Now the child would be about 4 or 5 years old. I'm not doing readings today, Tammy. I will be doing readings tomorrow, so if you want to come back then. And so they met a Chinese family in the park. And the white family, their daughter was hiding behind them. So you couldn't see that their daughter was Chinese. And this white couple asked a couple in the park, "Are you Chinese?" And they responded, sorry, lots of action at the front window. Dougie's barking. And they were kind of taken aback, especially because, the race, the ethnicity was identified. And then the adopted Chinese daughter popped out and the two little girls ran off on the playground. And they played together, and then a little white boy came and made some snarky remark, and the girls together, because there was a power in their togetherness, dealt with this little white boy and another one who interfered with them. It was not a very pleasant little reel to watch. But I'm in the public school system, and I observe this with the young children. It's actually quite amazing. They don't even really, I don't want to say they don't notice, but they certainly are very matter of fact about skin color, various differences and things. It just doesn't seem to be a very big deal where I live. And yet I did hear a child say to another, "Why is your skin so dark?" And I think that was simply a curiosity question. So I'm really kind of going off topic here. But I think we can bring this shaming feeling of not fitting in to deepen the conversation of this card rather than diving so quickly into the esoteric interpretation of this card. And somehow listening to the question and finding a way with this card. I'm just going to read Perry's comments out loud. The energies of the Hanged Man is a gaining access to a shocking new perspective and strength of purpose due to endure the situation with survival and learning from each. Right. So this is the, and I feel like a lot of refugees, and I'm using that as an archetype, not as a person, right? The refugee archetype, the intense survival factor, like the way that certain ethnicities of people work so hard. And people do make fun of certain groups of people. Like, they have so many jobs, they work so hard, and I hear people say, well, they're taking all the jobs away from us. Well, they're willing to do the work and wanting to do the work and need to do the work. So I don't know, it's a really interesting layer to bring into the tarot. It's a crying shame that people are condemned to live with hatred and murderous actions that are threatening their existence and the ability to live safely and free from aggressive actions. Well, how about violence against seniors and the abuse of seniors, including, and I'm looking at these images and I'm thinking, well, maybe these are telephone poles. And where I'm going with this is the constant and very creative and manipulative use of scams, telephone scams. Of course, they happen on emails and all that as well too, but they still exist on emails. By telephone, and there's a great targeting to seniors, and yes, also public abuse of seniors and in nursing homes as well too. Now, these probably aren't going to be the kind of clients that you have to do readings with. But let's think about this. I want to look at some of the details of these cards and also see if there's other things we can pick up from the imagery. Okay, so I don't have old historic decks. I mean, really old ones. The oldest deck, so where is, it's right here. Okay, so let's put these kind of in order. And then the Jacques via V also goes here. Jacques via V. Okay, so 16. So this deck, this, let me zoom in a little bit. Vianney de la Torre is also 17th century. And that, these are the oldest decks that I have, unfortunately. I would love to have some others, maybe one day. I would love to have a Metelli. Okay, so this one may very well be a little older, so let's just go like this. What I'm picking up on these cards is that we are indeed on the outskirts of town, and this is a public shaming. And one of the things I want to talk about is that these are not epaulettes. I believe that there has been, these arms have been broken. These people hung on these trees have been beaten and their elbows broken. They've been tied. Maybe they've been tied in such a way that the tying broke the arms. I mean, this is not contortionism, I don't think. I mean, how could this be contortionism? And artistically, there's a lot of things that don't work in this picture, right? The way that the clothing, none of the clothing is hanging upside down, and generally speaking, well, the hair in this one is hanging. Gravity, right? Gravity is affecting the hair, but certainly none of the clothing. And you would think that the bottom part of the shirt, would be hanging down. So there's a lot of artistic license here. And why, I mean, are we looking at a penis? I don't really think that adds anything to the conversation, but that may or not be there. We do see it in some of the other decks as well, too. And what does that mean? Does that mean that the, I don't know, the pants are partially removed or have been ripped as part of the humiliation? In this deck, this feels like this was constructed in town. These are beautiful pillars, and this is not a tree on the outskirts of town. So I think that element really changes a message here. So this would be somebody that the townspeople were meant to see and know that this person had committed heresy or something like that. And this looks like a child, actually. Looks like a child. And I believe in some of the historical reference books, there are several, or maybe it is in the Visconti Forza, Visconti Madrone, those decks, that the hanged one is a child. So what did this child do? Steal a loaf of bread? I don't know. Then, okay, so we have this possible empathy that may arise in the interpretation of this card. But what if this card is asking you or showing you how you may have shamed another? How would you know this? Well, I guess if you were reading for somebody else, you would need to listen carefully to language, the way that questions were being formed. But there's that reflection that the tarot does so well too. And if you're reading for yourself, then well, I don't think you'd be reading tarot, really, if you were that kind of person. Okay. Then there is also discussion about the reversal of the Roman numerals. And in this particular deck, I have another version of this card here. Some people would say that, right, so these are woodblock prints, so that it was just, there was an error, simply an error made in the woodblock. Or it was printed. Yeah, there was an error made in the woodblock, so it came out as an 8 instead of a 12. Okay. I really want to leave the esotericism out of this. Okay, so these are the oldest decks that I have. These are 17th century. And then we go to the 18th century. And this is Jean-Pierre Payen. And I have the Madani deck here. This is such a beautiful deck. The imagery is so clear. And here we do see the male appendage as well, too. And maybe that is simply pointing out the gender. Oh, yes. So Dodal is the very beginning of the 18th century. So let's put the Dodal here. And again, we're seeing these, we still have these fingers that are appearing at the top, but not in this deck. This deck, the arms appear to be, and the hands tied behind the body. And the hair, so much more natural in this one. But what these three decks do have in common is that rough cut wood. Now, it is possible that in this form of hanging, you could hang yourself in this way, right? You could, because the trees are so close together, it would be possible to do this to yourself. Now, why? Why would you do this? You'd have to be quite athletic. But yes. Okay. Let's read another comment from Perry. Mindfulness and the ability to live with empathy and the golden rule is a simple way to find a place of peace and learning to live together harmoniously and kindly. There is, in my community, a great deal of resentment about international companies that have purchased formerly Canadian companies. So the money comes from overseas and the management comes from overseas, and the nature of the business begins to change. And because of this change and the way things are done differently through the eyes of another culture, another standard of work ethics, then that culture, that workforce speaks terribly about that culture. And it's just makes things so difficult because assumptions are made. And so here's an example. I could imagine a querent arriving at a reading with a lot of confusion around this. And often, in my experience, the hatred, the anger, the feeling that you are being wrong done by a different system is from a complete lack of understanding. And I have a tremendous, I did teach English as a second language. I have lived in a few different countries, and I have no problem listening to non-native speakers of English in their the way that they speak English. There's a certain patience and that needs to go with that, because often they may also be speaking in translation. And the way certain cultures answer questions can be quite, or different languages answer questions can be quite different. And certain cultures, for example, would never say no directly. And so it does. It takes a tremendous capacity to meet a new culture with complete compassion and patience. And so I want to extend patience to those who are struggling in that situation, but also I want to educate and provide compassion and understanding to those who feel that they are being hard done by an international company taking over a Canadian company and changing everything. It's really difficult. So in this case, I could see the long-term employees, the Canadian long-term employees, feeling like this, even though they are not the non-dominant culture. And so having this conversation and thinking about this card in this way, I think it's really important. And it's so different than diving into where I would usually go in interpreting this card. Or is it? And I think the possibility. Okay, so how about this situation? What about going back to childhood trauma? Shaming, being shamed as a child by parents. Maybe your parents didn't hang you upside down, but they certainly shamed you in front of friends, family. What about being shamed by a schoolmaster? And maybe this trauma still lives within you and shows up in a tarot reading through the lens of the Hanged Man. Yeah. Okay. So, and interesting, all of these cards have the reversal of the 12. All right. And then we go to the Minchiati. And this is the only card that I have like this. And so here we see a perhaps a form of torture. And sometimes these bags of sand or rocks were tied to the wrists, and this would contribute to the disabling, like the damaging of the shoulder joints, for sure. And then, so Minchiati, and then 1835. This is the, and again, we look like we have rough hewn forms here. This is the Tarocco Sopraffino, Milano, 1835. This is the Il Meninghello version. And the Gassman Tarot. Now, this is a really, I have one other that looks like, oh yes, it's the contemporary one that I'm going to put on the table. Now, what's different in this one is that we have 2 feet that are hung, not one. And you can think about the level of pain and what this experience would be like. When we hang upside down, all the blood rushes to your head. And I think after a certain amount of time, you would pass out. Unless this was something you did regularly and hung upside down. It's definitely going to affect your heart rate, your blood pressure. It's just not a comfortable position to be in. And I'm looking at this card here and I'm thinking, he has enough strength to turn his head into this position, but what is he looking at? Is this a panic? Is there a wild animal down there about to jump up? I don't know. So did I say this is the Gassman Tarot, Francois Gassman, 1840. And interesting, this is a deck, this is the Tarot Key 23 by Gergely. Just let me get the deck here. Gergely Bagaman. His or their shop is called Midnight Tarot. They have a few decks, Tarot Key 23. And so interesting that this one is inspired by this style of tarot. So what am I going to take away from this? And how does reflecting on the history, the possible histories of what this may represent affect how I might read this card going forward? Well, I think of all of the tarot cards, this is one that we rarely read literally. And I think we do a disservice to it because it may find a powerful and deep connection in any of these topics that I have mentioned here today. So let's expand our empathy and level of interpretation of this card, because I think to immediately jump into the esoteric interpretation might miss something for a given reading. There are people who have felt isolated their whole life for one reason or another. And so let's maybe use this card as medicine for finding a way to healing that trauma. Thanks to Perry for joining in the conversation, and I look forward to those of you that have time to comment later on in the once it processes below. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your day. Namaste. Bye, Perry.